Now, we do have this of a card for the Cloverdale Library art exhibit that's going on May 4th through 31st. And apparently they had a reception that we didn't get to on last Friday.
How was it, Keo?
Beautiful as usual. Well attended.
Yes, it's a high point of social life in Cloverdale.
And all dressed up.
All right, let's move on to public comment for items, to address the commission for items that are not on the agenda.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Is this on?
I don't think so.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. 3 ongoing unresolved issues need your attention. To whatever degree we'll resolve them. They are not the only important issues on your plate, of course, but resolving them would free up time and energy for other vital matters. First, over the last several months, budget figures have been provided for the amount supposedly saved by closing the libraries on Mondays and for the amount it would supposedly take to reopen on Mondays. These figures have been questioned and disputed, and requests have been made by you yourselves too for clarification. But we still don't have a clear, comprehensible answer. Please get one. Secondly, please recognize the need for your commission to begin now to craft a plan for reopening on Mondays. The budget you will submit to the Board of Supervisors needs to indicate that you are serious about doing this. This cannot be a let's do it later item. Thirdly, despite questions by yourselves, the grand jury, and the public, there is still no adequate answer as to why furniture being bought by the library branches costs 2, 3, or more times than it should. Spending money like this is like burning it, and we can hardly afford to do that when our libraries are closed on Mondays. The current JPA puts you in charge. Please don't allow vital issues to sit in stasis. Please move on them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comment? All right. Moving on then to the special report from John for the Sonoma County Library, Wine Library.
I suppose I could also stand.
Well, whichever works for you.
Welcome, John.
Yes, we're delighted. John, how long have you been here now? It's not quite a year.
July 2nd.
Yeah, it will be a year.
Welcome, and thank you for the opportunity to come and talk about the wine library a little bit.
Let's see, can you all see the other?
Mm-hmm. Well, those on this side of the tape, okay. Nice graphic.
Could you press yeah, okay, thanks. All right, so I'm gonna, you can actually move on. I'm John Haupt, the wine librarian. Nice to meet you. In this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the wine library and mention a few things about what we have in our collections and services, and talk a little bit about challenges that we're facing at the moment and what that presents in terms of opportunity. Some people are probably not aware of how the wine library came to be, and one cannot explain this without starting by talking about Millie Howie, a wine writer and publicist who in the 1970s provided dedicated leadership to creating a wine library. There were a few wineries, about 9 original wineries, who worked with Millie to get things going. Initially, there was concern that they were trying to just put wine bottles alongside the books, and eventually everyone came to realize that this was intended to be a wine information resource. It was dedicated in February 1989, and since then there have actually been 3 wine librarians, Bo Simons, Zita Eastman in the mid-1990s, and myself as of last July. The wine library has a support network on 3 legs. Obviously, the library system as a whole provides the bulk of support for the library, and then there is a friends group which is specific to the library called the Wine Library Associates of Sonoma County. And then finally, the wine industry can subscribe to the library directly. And the Wine Library Associates has provided a number of high-profile events in the past. Before the library even opened in the 70s and 80s, there was a polo, wine, and all that jazz event that was held, and then in the 90s and in the 2000s, Sonoma Odyssey, and lately we've been focusing more on smaller events since Sonoma Odyssey ended in 2008. In terms of the collections that we have, we cover basically any material that is maybe of use to anyone interested in wine, from winemakers and grape growers to those interested in marketing the material, anyone looking for information about the history of wine and winemaking, both locally and internationally. And just anyone interested in the county, tourism, and really all things culinary in some ways. We also have a myriad of different formats, from 5,000 to 6,000 books. We have the most up-to-date books, but they also date back to 1512. And we have subscriptions to 75 or 80 periodicals, maps, posters, photographs, wine labels, films, games, and other ephemera. And looking at the periodical literature gives you a sense of the different subjects that we cover, from the Wine Advocate to a horticulture, scientific horticulture journal, and sort of everything in between. And here's one of the books. This one's from 1627. So we have quite a few materials that we get out the white gloves for. And these are a few of the oddities in the collection. I just pulled them right out of the cabinet.
Chug-a-lug sounds so scholarly.
It's a very special board game. I literally open up cabinets from time to time, and my experience is, wow, I didn't know we had this. So it's stuffed full of things that I really would not have been expecting. And we have actually about 15 file cabinets full of folders. And these folders contain information about all kinds of information, and that brings me to the next page, which is about wine files, which started as a vertical file of part index to wine periodical literature, part local index to local wine history, and part treasure trove of wine information of all kinds. This started in the central library before the wine library opened as a vertical file, and eventually became this resource where people can come and ask questions, and then they find information in these folders. In 1999, we had a grant which was to build an online index to these materials using the Berkeley Sun site. And it was not really designed in a sustainable way in 1999, which is true of a lot of library resources at that time. And so right now we're working to make it better, make it possible for other wine libraries to contribute to the project, particularly the index to periodical literature. That seems like that's this kind of collaborative thing that libraries are doing these days. But also make advances in user interface design and indexing that we've made in the last 13 years. and also promote it to users and to other libraries, which are, because of the current situation, we haven't been promoting it as much as we'd like to. But they are using it. And so the other libraries that I've been talking to have been excited about the possibility of participating on the project. And to that end, we have a current grant proposal out with the state library to try to take advantage of our existing staff resources to do what I was just saying.
Do you want questions at the end, or should we ask as we go along?
Go right ahead if you have a question.
I do. So I want to make sure I understand, when you were talking about the wine files, are those now digital, or are they still in folders in a file drawer?
A little bit of both. So we've started scanning them now. However, we can't provide access online in full text because of various copyright concerns. We don't have permissions and so on. So it's kind of a dark archive of materials. The thing that's currently publicly available online is the index. So you can find out what we have in the collection, and then we can provide it. And I'll talk a little bit later about our document delivery service. In terms of moving on, right now our collection policy is very amorphous, and like I said, we kind of have a little bit of everything. The way that libraries are really moving is, now that we can all collaborate and we're not really stemmed by physical location, we can be more focused, and then say maybe UC Davis's library can be more focused on one thing and we can be on another, and CSU Fresno's wine collection can be focused on something else. So that's one thing. And we haven't changed a whole lot over the last 25 years in terms of the collection policy, and I think the county has changed a lot since then, so there's a lot of potential. And I've listed here a few areas where I'm currently going over with a task force I'm going to tell you about in a moment, what our needs might end up being, and so any of those areas are possible. I'm definitely finding everyone seems to be in agreement that there's no other resource to have an archival collection of what, sort of a depository archive of Sonoma County wine history. And I'd love to do that. And that might be a larger project that we can handle right now, but I think it's a good long-term goal.
Is there a wine library lab?
Lab?
Library Advisory Board.
Advisory board?
No.
Just the wine, they're friends, they're
There's a friend.
wine library
Oh, I
associates.
saw advisory group on there, I didn't.
Right now, that would be the task force that I've just started. In terms of the services that we provide, obviously the largest thing we do is research assistance, but people also request things, and we provide some events and exhibitions. These are some questions that we get. We get questions from grape growers and winemakers and local wine enthusiasts, a student asking a question about groundwater, a new owner of a winery asking, about their vineyard, and do you have any labels from when we were called something else before, and so all of those questions are very common. And then we have that question of, I just found some things on winefiles.org, and I'd really like to be able to see those articles, so how can I get access to that? And since we're providing public access online to the index, we get questions from Germany or other places, and so we're trying to figure out the best way to do it. Like most libraries, we've moved towards scanning our materials, and just recently we, through the Wine Library Associate support, were able to get a new scanner, which I'm excited about. And here's a picture of our exhibition space. Right now we have an exhibition on the Italian-American immigrant experience in the county. And this is another thing that we do is just have events. This is one of our recent events on Eastern Seaboard wine. And we had a presentation and tasting on Eastern Seaboard wines in our forum room. In terms of challenges, these are some of the things that I'm figuring out this year. Obviously, like everyone, we're dealing with a lower amount of money that we have in the past. We also have the Wine Library Associates has kind of slowed down over time, and the membership and the leadership have been aging. I feel like the industry itself just is quick on its feet right now, both the industry kind of primary industry people, the grape growers and the winemakers, but especially the tourism part of the industry. And just keeping in touch with what they're doing and kind of providing them with the best resources that they need, and staying in touch with those users. And then outreach, making sure people know about the library. If you could go forward.
It didn't.
It didn't. It got
There.
ooh. It's all right. I will just keep talking. Along the lines of branding, these are some examples from our current marketing materials. And I'm looking to try to update those materials. And we're also taking advantage of some of the newer resources, like we have a new blog, we have a Facebook, Twitter, Google+, things like that. And we're trying to turn our challenges into opportunities. So we're looking at our 25th anniversary next year, and trying to figure out some sort of big event to have. I've started a task force, which I started talking about earlier. We're calling it the International Association of Wine Libraries. There was a wine librarians group, but it was focused on something less specific. So this one's more library services and collections oriented, and just coming up with new partnerships.
Can I ask who is, or do you have the larger wineries represented on your task force in the county?
Yeah, so one of the most largest people involved in the task force is from Pedroncelli Winery. They're kind of all over. I was really trying to find people from all over the county. So I have someone from Larson Family Winery, which is in the south part of the county. We have a professor from who lives in Roanoke Park from SSU. We have a grape grower from West County, west of Sebastopol. Pedroncelli Winery is up in Geyserville. So kind of tried to just get as much of a cross section of the county as I could. We have a wine writer and some grape growers. So it's kind of an interesting combination of people.
John, are they people who've had involvement over the years with the wine library, or are they new to the wine library?
It's a mix. So Julie Pedroncelli St. John has been involved with the library for many, many years. On the flip side, I met the person from Larson Family Winery at the Harvest Fair, and she'd never heard of it. So kind of everywhere in between.
Okay. I might have a couple suggestions for you of people who are quite well connected at the very large wineries in the area, and be good to get them involved as well.
Great. And we've had 2 meetings and kind of broken into small groups, but I just added somebody else last week who was kind of higher up in the wine grape commission. And so there's definitely room for another person or two.
Okay.
I'm focusing on trying to come up with a strategic plan and kind of course of action, and starting with the basics, because I feel like nobody's really asked this question for a long time. So who are the users of the library? What are their needs? What are our objectives? How can we meet those needs? What supports do we need in order to be able to get there? And then they're going to help me come up with a plan of action to actually get there. And these are just a few partnerships, some of which we already have, and some of whom I've been talking to recently about maybe getting together. There isn't really, when it says California Wine Museum, that is a person with 3 barns full of very amazing, thousands and thousands of wine artifacts, and he is trying to find a buyer. He's basically the collector. He's already calling it the California Wine Museum, because there isn't another one, but it's exciting. And that's all I have, so I'd be happy to take any other questions.
When you said there were subscriptions, that people, what do you get for a subscription?
It varies. The subscription model starts with something like $40 for basically side kind of industry people like writers and so on, to closer to $600, say, for the large wineries that produce many, many, many cases of wine, and kind of it's progressive.
What are the benefits?
What are the benefits
Oh.
of a subscription? I'm sorry, why would you buy one?
Right. It's this combination currently of knowledge that the library wouldn't exist without their support, to we provide them with personalized reference assistance and kind of like free document delivery.
Any member of the public can access any of those items without being a subscriber?
Yes, there isn't anything currently which is only accessible to subscribers. I'm looking at, one of the things that I was hoping that we'd talk about with the task force is, what could we offer that would be exciting for subscribers?
And I think we'd have to make sure that whatever is being offered for subscribers only isn't something that's defined as needing to be free by the
Right.
California state statutes, that we violate something there.
For the people who haven't been up to Healdsburg and don't know where the library is housed, it's in the Healdsburg branch. If you walk in the door and keep going, it's at the, well, it depends, it's at the side or the back of the library, depending on which way you look. But it is, for years I heard about the wine library and I didn't know exactly where it was. So that's where it actually lives, is in the Healdsburg building. I had another question, but I can't remember what it was. Are there other questions or comments from the commission?
I have a quick question. So this is also a historical collection, like winemaking in Sonoma?
Yeah. So we answer a lot of questions about, what do you have in your collection as far as historical information on Kenwood vineyards or something like that? And then we'll often end up, there's oral histories that we've been doing. The Wine Library Associates for years have done a series of oral histories of prominent individuals in the industry. And then any newsletters or, just public reports or anything that have been made on that particular winery, we probably have them in our folders.
Do you have inventories or pictures of the labels?
We have a lot of labels. We haven't had a comprehensive sort of depository system where they've sent them to us, but we've received a number of high-profile donations. So we have quite a large collection of labels.
One collector left you a portion of his collection, isn't that correct? And part of it went over to St. Helena, the wine library over there, and part of it came here.
Right. Yes, there is.
His name has escaped
I,
me.
me too, for some reason. But most of his archival collection, I mean, when he was living, he gave us quite a bit of, no, he gave most of his material to the Napa Wine Library when he was living.
The Napa Library being the one that's housed at
In
St.
St.
Helena.
Helena. When he died, his widow gave us, no, whoever it was
His
who was in
heirs.
charge of his material gave us his, what was remaining.
Talk a little bit more about conceptually where the idea for the creation of the database for wine files came from, the Music Library Association model, and what we're proposing to do.
So, before I was a wine librarian, I was a music librarian, so I have a...
Somewhere in there you were an art librarian
Right.
too. But he's a gifted musician, as is his wife.
There is a index to music literature, which has been created for the last 60 years or so, that I thought provided a good model for how to create something like this. It's a much larger organization, obviously, the Music Library Association, but they crowdsource, they call it, the content. So they add records to their database, and then what the librarians are good at is providing subject analysis and abstracts of the material. And then that is actually sold to EBSCO or ProQuest, kind of the library.
Commercial database vendor.
Commercial database vendors, and then they pay the individual libraries for their what they provide to the project, and then they create a index product which they sell to other libraries. And I think that now that there are libraries all around the country, now that we have wineries in every state, I keep hearing about people in other states like Iowa who keep telling me, well, we just started a viticulture and enology program at such and such university, and I don't know a thing about it, so I'm trying to figure out, and if we had a product that they could, participate in or have, then at least they'd have a resource that they can go to for some periodicals resources.
Have you ever tasted any of those wines? I'm not sure this should be encouraged.
Well, he's tasted some from the East Coast.
Well, okay.
Let's talk a little bit more about the database.
So I think that we proposed initially to the state library that we would like to have a consultant come in and go through with us kind of that whole process. When I was looking at that as a whole,
The music library model.
right, I decided that it was tricky enough where I needed someone who had done this before a lot to go through and explain to us how to go from point A to point B. And so we asked for money to pay for the consultant. And I still think that would have been good. But the state library was a little bit unsure about that model. Maybe it was too amorphous for them. And so what we've now proposed is something more concrete to them, which is to take the existing material and kind of take the first step, which we know we're going to have to do anyway, which is clean up the existing data in our database, and then make it into an interface that people can actually use. And no matter what happens, those are steps that are going to have to be taken. So we have the expertise necessary to do that in the library, but we need the money in order to pay him to do it. And so we're hoping to use Mark Cooper, who's currently working on our Evergreen project.
So it would, essentially what we're proposing to do, the state library objected, I think, not only to the consultant, but to the idea that the product would be sold to a commercial vendor. So now the direction we've taken with this proposal is to develop the prototype in-house and then look for a not-for-profit corporation that would be willing to help market the product and do crowdsourcing to develop and maintain the content. Is that a fair description?
Definitely. And one of the neat things that I think Mark has brought to the project is the idea of not only could we make it so other libraries can contribute content, but the way that systems work nowadays, you can set them up so that if there are data sources outside of what we've already created, for example, a journal that's providing its citation data on another website, we can take the citation data sort of programmatically from their website onto ours, which...
Send a little digital runner out to grab it, right?
Right.
So we are supposed to, this is called a pitch an idea grant, which we've submitted, and we have to, John has to verbally pitch it to the state library staff May 23rd, and then we'll hear more. They were really intrigued with the idea, I think, when we did it during the last round and really wanted to fund it. And I think there were some stumbling blocks, definite stumbling blocks with the commercial vendor idea. So this has, we hope, more possibility for moving forward to create the digital content. A couple of years ago, I did a little marketing study with a wine library, and we had a little advisory group that included Millie before she passed away, as well as people from the wine industry. And they basically said, until you have digital content, you don't have anything to market. They really want to be able to access the resources of the wine library where they are, rather than having to physically go to the library at Healdsburg. So that's a big challenge. We have created, did have a grant that created the beginning of digital content. And the first topic was indeed the Italian-American experience and their influence in the winemaking industry and wine growing industry in Sonoma. And then we've digitized some of the other content. So this is a continuing effort to create more digital content.
Some of our rare books have been spending the last year or two in the Internet Archive being digitized, and some of the images that I used, like these grapes, I just took right out of the Viola and Vermerel amphilography from very early 20th century, which is where most of these images that you see of grapes come from that resource. And so we've had it scanned, and 3 of the volumes are now available online out of 7.
What about the reading and discussion group that you and Matthew have come, the food and wine?
I've
Super
been
fun.
just trying to figure out not only how to work together with all the other partnerships I already mentioned, but within the library system as a whole. I was thinking it would be fun to do some sort of book club related to wine, and then Matthew started, and he said that he had done a food-related thing in his previous job, and so we decided to start a food and drink-related book club that's associated with the Sebastopol Library, and then we're collaborating on it. Our last event was we read A History of the World in 6 classes and did a Barlow crawl in Sebastopol. It was fun. Kind of got to see behind the scenes of some of the different things that are going in there, and you will be able to partake of all 6 classes in the Barlow when it's ready. So it's been a good adventure.
Well, is there any public comment? Well, thank you very much. Very, very nice to see what we're doing well and where we're going and moving along. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Okay, it's now time for commission reports, major items and lab activities. Before we get from each individual, I'd like to just begin by, at the last meeting, there was a question presented from the public about the percentage of our legal expenses that have been used for negotiations. And a rough estimate from what I've been able to gather is around 55% has been used for the negotiation process. Okay, shall we start over there?
Sure. Something came up at the last meeting about Telus Cirque in Spanish, and so I asked about that. My recollection is it was about $16,000 to do it, and I would like to recommend at some point that we do that. I think it's will be a useful thing for our patrons.
May I
Yeah.
just interrupt? We need to look at exactly where the money would come from and how we would do it, so I'm assuming you're asking for a follow-up staff report on how we can make that happen.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. At our last lab meeting, I queried all the members there and the staff about the issue of Mondays, and at least in Sonoma Valley, it's a non-issue. It is not anything that people are marching in the streets for. You know, they have adjusted their schedules and come to the library at other times when we're open. I think that was all I had.
Okay.
I got to go to my first lab meeting, which was exciting, at the Roanoke Park Katati Library, and it was one of the topics, of course, was the open house in March, and that was very successful. Got a lot of public comment. There's about 156 people came through and commented, and there's going to be a report. Sandy was at that meeting, and we talked about, I guess, the July commissioner meeting. They want to give a report. I think that's on the agenda. Is it coming
Yeah,
up?
I shared it with Tim.
Yeah, and they're going to do a presentation. I think PowerPoint, and they're going to dance and sing. I don't know, something like that. Anyway, it's going to be interesting. But-
Interesting.
And a couple of the other things that came up at the meeting, they're going to host the second annual lab conclave, and that's going to be on Saturday, May 18th. I think we all know about that. And on June 12th at 5 p.m., that's a Wednesday, there's a ribbon cutting for the 10th anniversary of the library by the Chamber of Commerce, and both chambers will be there, Roanoke Park and Katati. And June 7th, they're having a book sale. The other item that's of note, the youth member, Brianna Walsh, is off to Georgetown, so that was her last meeting.
Either Georgetown or Berkeley, she was still deciding.
Yeah, she was leaning toward Georgetown.
Yeah, we were sort of encouraging
I
her.
thought, she will be president one day.
Yeah,
She's that. She is something.
Right.
And I just, today, Rebecca sent me an application to replace Brenda Adrian Montour. And so I was going to talk more about that with the librarian. See what, I just got it today, and of course it's Monday, so nobody was there.
We had, when that position was first created, there were several applicants, and the commissioner went through and evaluated them all and reported back
Okay,
to the commission on that.
okay, so I will follow through on that. That'll be
Probably
great.
want to also talk to Sandra Breedlove, who's one of the librarians who does a lot of the work with the teens
Oh,
at
I'm sorry,
there-
Sandra
Breedlove,
Breedlove.
Breedlove. She does most of the YA.
I think they share it, Lori.
Lori does too,
Oh, okay.
yeah. So talk to Lori and Sandra,
Okay,
because they have, I think, a cadre of teen volunteers.
okay. That'll be
From
good.
whence came Brianna, super Brianna.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that was the major points, but it was it seems like a real good group, and they're looking for a few more members for the lab.
They're meeting monthly now, right?
Every other month.
month, yeah. So I think that's all I have to say.
Cloverdale Lab meets next week, so nothing to report there. Helena and I went on a field trip in terms, but we can talk about that, I guess, if you want us to wait to get to the agenda on, as part of our ad hoc revenue.
Okay. Okay, nothing else? No. Helena? We'll go that way and work.
Okay. Let's see, so Sebastopol Lab meets monthly, and they met last week. Guerneville meets every other month, and they meet next week. Sebastopol Lab has been very busy. They are working on, the labs have an opportunity to speak at the next JPA meeting on May 31st, so they're working on what it is they would like to say, because I think that each lab has about 3 minutes to say their piece. There are 2 vacancies effective June 30th on the Sebastopol Lab. We have a longtime member, Rhea Vogue, is deciding to step down, and she's been part of the library for a very long time. And then we also have Barbara Briggs-Ledson, who does a lot of traveling and doesn't feel that she's here enough to participate as much as she should. So there will be 2 openings, and they're hoping to post them soon so that we can get somebody in place by July.
I think they're posted.
Okay. Let's see, they have completed their library advisory handbook, and I think other library advisory groups have expressed interest in that. It's something that they're sending out to the other library advisory groups so that they can take a look at it, and it might be something that gets talked about at the countywide meeting. And they're planning another public forum. They had one a few months ago, that was pretty successful. And they've started something very interesting. They're trying to figure out how to get community input. So they're starting this process. It's just a test survey that people can, when they come into the library, they can see and fill out a survey if they're interested on a particular issue. And I think this is the e-books. They're just trying to get a feel for, they know it's already a done deal, but they just want to see, as a getting public response to see if this works. So that'll be interesting to see. Both Guerneville and Sebastopol have their book sales starting on the 15th. I think they don't like to be competing, but they're thinking that there must be a way to talk to other labs to make sure that they're not on the same date. And is Sonoma's that same date, that same weekend? Yeah. So they feel like it's too much competition. Maybe at the conclave they can talk about not having, figuring out how the weekends can work. And I think that's it. Oh, the Friends are having their annual election this Wednesday.
Do they have a new chair yet?
Sebastopol?
Sebastopol.
Yes, the vice chair, Phil Peterson, not Peterson, but Brownell is the chair, and they're planning to hold elections in August.
Okay.
Santa Rosa doesn't meet until next week, but I have 2 issues that I'm going to talk to the lab about, and then, would love to hear what other labs do and have to say about these things. And they are, one is asking the lab to take an active participatory role in recruitment of new lab members. And then the second is whether the lab wants to change their, not charter, what is it called?
Bylaws.
Bylaws, thank you, to have a mandatory minimum attendance, because we have some members who show up rather sporadically.
All right. Petaluma Lab met. We are going to be looking at our bylaws. One of the reasons we need to look at the bylaws is we're thinking of changing our meeting dates. They have been on the Tuesday.
The 4th Tuesday.
The 4th Tuesday of January, April, July, and October. And they want to move it to Wednesdays for the health reasons regarding our chair. And we also discussed a little bit about input on priorities if funds start to come back. And one of the ideas that came up that I thought was really good was how much would each priority cost and what would it cost to implement them partly. There was not much else in terms of input at that particular meeting. Let's see. Also, I would just like to mention to the commission, this is, we are continuing with the idea of Sandy and my meeting and providing a 6-month rough draft of agenda issues that we want to be sure get on the agenda. And so I think it would be really helpful if any of you folks have things that you would like to not get lost in the next 6 months. I think probably you can either tell Sandy or me. If you tell me, remember, don't answer to everybody, but I think you can send me an email. But don't send to everybody. Brown Act. Are there any other comments or things from the commission? Okay. Moving on to committee reports. The Joint Powers Committee has not met, but the the county committee met on Friday. Helena was there as an alternate. Do you want to give a bit of?
Sure. Let's see. I just want to be sure to mention that the next meeting on May 31st is from 2 to 5. They've extended it by 1 hour to make sure that they have enough time, which hopefully that will be enough time, but it's on governance. And as I mentioned earlier, I think it's an opportunity for the library advisory boards to come and speak about what's important to them in the JPA. And it could be a range of items, but there is an allotted time of about a half an hour for all of the library advisory boards to speak. And from that meeting, the committee plans to give specific directions on governance to the staff to draft and to come up with a draft amended joint powers agreement in July. So after that draft is presented, and there will be 1 to 3 meetings of discussion on that draft. And then depending on, what happens with that, Mike McGuire anticipated that the greater part of the fall would be spent in Joint Powers Agreement Review Committee members going back to their city councils or boards or the Board of Supervisors to seek ratification of that draft. So it seems like we have an opportunity between and I did talk to Julia briefly about this and suggested that the committee get together, our committee get together again and go over the white paper and see if, based on all of the information that we have all heard at these meetings and had input from all sorts of people, if we want to do any kind of revision to that and present it again to this review committee. So that's my suggestion on that. And I can't think of any other thing there was a lot of, let's see, the SoCasol presented their paper on recommendations on governance at this meeting. So I have copies of that, and I believe the other copies will be posted
They're on the site.
Yeah.
On the county's website.
On the county's website.
So there was a lot of that began a lot of discussion with the committee, and there were ideas in that paper that many people entertained favorably. So then there was some discussion on the makeup. Ann Keck presented different joint power, I can't remember if it was Ann Keck or Dawn, but different.
It was Ann Keck.
Okay, different the makeup of different governing bodies for other joint powers agreement library systems. So there was a lot of discussion on that. I think the county administrator's office is going to come back with some information specifically on Santa Clara County's committee or board and how it works. And
Why Santa Clara?
I don't
That
know,
was
that
the
was
one
somebody,
that members
somebody had a
seemed to
question.
favor. It's a combination of a joint powers authority, the board that's made up of electeds from all the participating local jurisdictions. And the director reports to the county administrator for administrative purposes, but reports to the authority board. So it's a dual reporting that I think needs to be clarified.
Yeah, so they were going to do some actual talking to people down in Santa Clara, I think, to find out how it works, if it works well or if there are issues with it. So I think the general consensus seemed to be that none of the examples, although they each seem good standing alone, but none of them really fit with how Sonoma County is or should be. And so I think that's, of course, still to be decided on how that works. And was there anything I missed, Tim? You were there.
Well, and
And Sandy was there, yeah.
Um,
Sure there was.
Go ahead, do you want to say?
No, I'll defer to you.
There was, I don't know, let's see, how can I, first of all, I think the SoCasol I just need to mention this, the SoCasol presentation was really wonderful in terms of the graphics. I mean, she put up a 1975 or whatever it was Chevy and said, this is what, this was built in, the same time as the Joint Powers Agreement, and she went on from there. That I found quite compelling. I don't know that this is the time for me to comment on some of the suggestions that were there, but it was, I think I'll say this. It's difficult to see the history, and we were also handed out a paper of the timeline, and to realize that it's a perception of how things have happened, and it's written in the white paper presented at the committee, but it's not exactly the way I would explain what I've seen happen over the last 2 or 3 years. And I don't know how, in terms of the committee, how important it is that the information that I'm not thinking is...
Talking about the information presented by SoCasol.
Yes. Well, it was presented in 2 ways by SoCasol. One of them was in their white paper, and the other was in a yellow sheet that we were handed out regarding what they saw as the timeline that was handed out to the audience. And it just felt, I mean, my thinking on that was perception gets presented as fact, and all history has different perspectives. And I don't know how the other perspectives get told or shown. That's...
I actually have a suggestion,
Okay.
because what has become clear is that this committee will consider any voices in a manner of presentations. So I know library staff, for instance, has trouble getting there at 2 o'clock on Fridays, because many of them are working. But if they were to submit something in writing, anything they wanted to be considered, the committee seems to be willing to copy and hand those out so that they can be submitted. I mean, I think letters that are submitted to Mike McGuire will be disseminated to the rest of the committee. And so I was wondering if we can't put on the intranet something that would encourage the librarians to have a voice here.
I think it's I think what we have to think about is the politics of whether the staff wants to step forward at this point, or whether it would be better if some of the retirees did. And rather than
Why is it either or?
I think you have to remember that the staff will be working for whoever comes out of this. And I think at this point, some of the retirees are very concerned that this is being developed in a vacuum without any understanding of the way libraries work.
I will tell you my perception of not on the record committee discussions is that the county administrator is very interested and believes that the commission should be made up of elected officials.
Right, I know
That's her
that.
position,
Yeah.
and that's where she is steering as much as possible. So my thought is that if there are considerations to why that should or should not happen, that library staff or retirees can provide just factors and elements that this committee should consider, or what their worries about having a commission of electeds might be that people can take into consideration. Now's the time for them to present those, because it sounds like Mike McGuire thinks we're going to be giving direction for actually drafting the JPA at the next meeting.
Well, and I have several questions about the process, because the current JPA does say that the current signatories have to all agree to reopen the JPA, and there's been no discussion of that since ANCAC dismissed it early on. Also, she's dismissing, because Tim spoke to his concern about having a commission of electeds, and ANCAC just dismisses that out of hand, that nobody will, the commission or whoever succeeds the commission is not going to get involved in selecting books. And she said that to me privately after the meeting too, when I said, have you looked at the education code to make sure that whatever we're doing is consistent with the state legal requirements for libraries? And so I think that there's a lot of predetermined, there's a bunch of assumptions about what's going to happen.
I'm convinced there's some predetermined things going on, but if we want to stop the predetermined train, and I don't know we do, but if people want to be heard, which is why I would like to be able to put something on the intranet or have something put up there that tells staff, even if you can't make it to the meeting, you can have your voice heard somewhat. I mean, I think as much input as possible from as many sources as possible would be good, but so far the only people talking on behalf of the library have been, those of us who can actually go to the meeting, and that's a small voice, and I'm not sure how much weight we carry.
Well, I think the other thing we have to think about is making sure that the lab voices are heard locally as this goes back for discussion. Not only just the lab voices are heard on May 31st, but that the lab voices are heard back in the communities as the document goes back to the communities, so that it's not just a slam dunk. And I'm also wondering if Kathy LaRocque doesn't need to weigh in on what the legal requirements are for even reopening the JPA.
I'm wondering if it might not be worth us paying Kathy LaRocque to come to the 31st meeting, asking her to be there and sit in and listen as our lawyer. And I would also encourage any commissioners that can make the time, even though I know it's a trek, to come and speak. I mean, we have very few people outside of sometimes the union and sometimes SOCASOL actually speaking.
Well, and sometimes the retired, Jim
Whatever.
Rosacci spoke at this
Right.
last meeting.
And Arlene Callan has been fairly consistent. She's retired Sebastopol branch manager. I think most of the people who are speaking are from Sebastopol and Garnville.
It's just, I think one of the things that I don't know that the elected officials have, aside from the basic principle that the separation of a library from elected officials, that insulation, I don't know if they understand how much work additional work they'd be taking on.
No, I'm sure they don't, and their view is that the elected staff will do a lot of the actual work. I mean, I heard suggestions and conversation of different structures, one of which was maybe the commission only met quarterly, so the electeds only had to show up quarterly, and staff would actually take care of the type of...
Staff being what staff?
Well, that's what I asked, and I was told the elected staff. So, Santa Rosa City manager's office would have to absorb whatever extra and each different, and I'm just thinking, oh, my Lord. These people are already overworked, and I don't know how they would coordinate with library staff, and I don't know. I
See,
mean,
that's
it
what's
wasn't
distressing
making a lot of
because-
sense to me.
ANCAC talks about all these standing committees that would be doing the work that's currently done by staff here, by library staff who are professional librarians,
And I
which
don't
is
know
one
if
of the
it would be on
things.
the standing committee, I think, would be made up of the elected staff members to be doing a bunch of the work.
But that's where I think there's real concern that they have no idea how the library operates.
Anyway, this is a report from the meeting, but things are happening there that I think it's important that people are aware of and speak out about and inform themselves about. And I think we can proceed from there to the ad hoc review revenue committee report. And we do need to meet.
So Susan and I were able to go to the Sacramento Public Library a week ago Saturday. And we took this field trip, and we were sorry Mary Evelyn couldn't join us because it would have been a fun day. It was pretty fun. We went there with the purpose of seeing and finding out more information about this book publishing machine that they have called the Espresso Book Machine. So we took a class from the librarian who manages the machine. And it was very interesting. There are a lot of people there who are interested in publishing their own books, and so they sit through a class and learn how it works and what they have to do, which is to make PDF files of their documents and format it the way it needs to be. And everybody, of course, is encouraged to get an editor before you put your book in the machine, because that's what happens after the book comes out, is you find all the mistakes. So, but it was a very interesting process, and he gave a kind of a background history of books and publishing, and so then he talked about the costs, and the Sacramento Public Library does a 3-tiered price range, and both Susan and I thought it was really too cheap. I said I have to get my book published here right away before they decide to raise their prices, because on the high end, they charge $300 for the service, plus $6 a copy of a book and 2 cents a page for the cost of the paper. But they throw in all kinds of service for that $300 price, including getting your ISBN number as part of the cost, and your Library of Congress number, and actually I think at that price they really help you do a lot of the formatting and making sure that everything's cool. But then on the low end it's like $25 you can print one copy, and it's $25 plus $6 for the book and 2 cents a page, and they still give you quite a bit of help. So it's a fascinating process, and the books that come out of this are like any paperback that you would buy in the bookstore, just sharp looking and nice looking, and they can print pages, I think 40 pages is a minimum, to 600 pages. Anyway, so it's fascinating, and they've had this machine now for a year and a half. They got it through a grant from the state library. The machine itself is extremely expensive. It's $180,000 for this machine. It's made up of 4 components: 2 printers, an Epson printer, an IBM printer, an Apple AirBook, I think, and then this part of the machine that is encased in glass, so you can watch it actually print and cut and make the binding of your books. And they have it out where the public can watch their books being published. So anyway, I have pictures. I've had pictures on my iPhones if you want to see what it looks like. But so it's a lot of money, and to do something like that, definitely we'd have to have some special fundraising or a grant or donations from friends. You have a question?
Did they say what their sales have been?
the fellow Jerry Ward estimated that they should be printing 1,000 copies a month.
So they've printed, I mean, it's fabulous. And we went to look at it under the revenue concept, and it's totally a great, I think, a great public service. Clearly not a money maker, okay? Because they've
Right.
published about 6,000 books. It was the figure he threw out in the last year and a half. They've got the upfront costs. They have someone who half of his time, you know, a seasoned 24-year, you know, experienced librarian is on this. And then they've recently hired a young man who's a graphic designer to kind of provide technical assistance. It takes about, I think it was 5 minutes to print, you know, to actually print each book. So it's slow and labor intensive. It also appears that the machine is kind of sensitive and finicky, and that they were on a very close first name basis with the tech support in
Right.
New York.
Maintenance.
So, you know, so the maintenance contract is key, and you're gonna use it likely if our, you know, I mean, it's, and I have some written stuff here. You know, so I think we would have to change our mindset from we would do this because it would be this great revenue stream to a, you know, a really great service that we could provide. I mean, it would be wonderful for kids to be able to, you know, write a book and then see it published, and the covers are color and the inside is black and white. You know, so I think there's tremendous opportunity of ways to position it in terms of the whole community, local authors, as well as children or young writers. But we probably need to quickly lose the idea that it would be a revenue, you know, stream for us, because it wouldn't.
Yes, and I agree with that. But we also had some visions of how fabulous it would be. I mean, you could have whole classes. Some of the books they showed us were books produced by a school or a classroom, and it would be a huge draw to bring people into the library that way. One thing that Sacramento does that's really kind of cool is they keep one copy of each book for their archives, and anybody has access to that. Anyway, there's also the space issue. We'd have to put it someplace that we don't currently, you know, like if we were to do another branch somewhere, say in Southwest Santa Rosa, and maybe with a collaboration with a school, it would, you know, it would be a doable thing to raise money to get something like that for a school and a library to collaborate to bring literature and, I don't know, writing into huh?
I'm pretty sure cell phones being too close to the microphones. Sorry.
Sorry.
Okay.
Anyway, so they don't make a lot of money on it. They're starting to get more people interested in it, so it's starting to pick up. He thinks it's going to pick up more, but he did estimate that they would have to print, was it 1,000 copies a month to break even to cover the maintenance contract. Not me.
It's this speaker, it's in this speaker. It has happened before.
So moving on, we also, while we were there, we saw that they had a sign up saying Passport Center. And it was on the same floor as the.
We brought back show and tell.
Yes, and that has only been open for 2 months. They're very excited about it. They're open, you know, they don't compete with the post office because they tend to have the activity at their passport center at hours the post office is not open, which is a huge service to the community. They had only been open 2 months, so they couldn't tell exactly how much it was making, but they get paid $25 for every passport. They also have a camera that they purchased to take passport photos. They charge $15 for the photos.
And is it run by staff or volunteers?
Yes, it's run by staff that was trained by the federal government on how to do that. So they have 4 staff members who run it as needed.
Yeah, and there was a specific, we did ask about that. There was a specific certification training and process they go through, but the federal agency that does that actually came to them from San Francisco and did all the training, certified the employees. And so you know, you have to have designated individuals who get the stamp of approval and all that, and know what to do. But it did seem like it actually, you know, was a moneymaker. And I've got the flyers here, you know, they have specific hours, you know, Tuesday evening, Friday afternoon, and Saturday, Sunday, you know, weekend hours, which is when the post office isn't. I would think if we could carve out, you need dedicated space. You need a place with a door that shuts. There's some privacy issues. You had to have, you know, a place where you could shut a door and there could be a conversation where they ask questions if they need to. But it seemed pretty straightforward. You know, Sacramento Central Library is very beautiful and has lots of space, which is nice. I don't know that we have just, you know, empty, unutilized space, but if we could carve out a place for it, you know, it does not look like the upfront costs are huge, and it does look like it is actually probably generates a nice little revenue and is you know, is a community service. I mean, is a benefit, is something that would help people.
Sounds like they've got a lot of staff.
It's
I mean, if they can have staff doing the books, 4 staff members doing that's a lot of staff.
It's a 4-story building. It's
Right.
huge.
Yeah.
Actually, it's 5 stories because the offices are on the 5th floor.
Yeah, they've got a basement area. Yeah.
So their plan is to roll it out to other branches, but they're starting at their central branch.
Wow. Somebody I know has been really pushing passports, but
Well, I mentioned it at Sebastopol Lab, and I don't know if you recall, Barbara Briggs-Ledson she'd gone back to Ohio for something, and she'd found out that they had the passport business there. Right, right, and she said that her information from Ohio was that they made like $35,000 a year off of them, which is kind of mind-boggling, but.
From the handout she gave, it's more, and then I went online and did a search, and there's quite a few libraries that are starting to do it around the country, and they're finding it to be a fairly steady source.
The question is, do you really net any money by the time you have to add staff to do it?
I don't think they added staff. I
Well,
think
that
they
would-
pull them off the desk when they need to.
Yeah, you'd have to look at that, but,
Yeah.
yeah, seriously, look at that.
Or maybe it would make enough to pay for a position,
Or the
part-time.
question is, if it's somebody who's a volunteer for the library specifically, are you allowed to have them trained?
yeah, you'd have to find out more about the
Find out that.
The
federal
training
process.
and the
to train.
certification.
Well, that'd be, how do we,
Well, as I recall, Sandy had already directed staff to do some more research on this. I can go back and look at the minutes. I'm pretty sure you said last year that would happen.
I don't believe that I had said that. I had the information on it. I think we had real concerns about space and staffing issues for
I think
it.
you asked her to have staff do some more research on that.
in any event, how do we proceed? Do we want to,
I mean, staff can come back with a report on what the issues would be or what it would take.
Let's have challenges and benefits.
Yeah, I think, and the first thing is, it does need a physical space with a door that closes, you know, and it doesn't need to be fancy or elaborate. So I think the first question is to identify, is there a possible space that could work?
I think the only place that we could probably do it would be at Roanoke Park. The only place that has a public space that you could go, and they have a small conference room.
So I think that's step one, figure
Yeah,
out where.
and now that Sacramento has their place open, I would think staff could contact them and find out
I
how
go over
that's
there
working.
Actually, go to meetings there once a month.
okay, moving right along.
Do you want comments from the public?
I do. Are there any comments from the public on the last agenda item, commission reports?
I think David was saying he had something to say.
Was he?
Yeah, this is about the espresso book machine, which I just want to point out there is another component that people rarely talk about when it comes to the espresso book machine or anything like that, a device of that type that prints on demand large amounts of text and binds it into a book. I'm interested in this from a resource sharing point of view and have been for ages, ever since the first one was acquired by the Internet Archive 10 years ago. where you can actually, on demand, print up a book that someone wants, if it's public domain or out of copyright. And there are many, many books like that that we spend quite a bit of money getting from around the country, from libraries that hold them. It would be really nice just to say, I mean, right now I'm sending the URL to people saying, well, you can look at it online, it's free, you know, and sometimes that works. Sometimes people really want print on paper, or they need that in some way. So this is an alternative. You know, I've actually been talking to Sacramento about serving as the point of contact for that and using that machine to do that for us. So it's not like we need to buy our own machine. There needs to be one regionally somewhere that we can all tap into. But just wanted to sort of put that out there too, that it's possible.
So just so I understand mechanically then, there's a way that you would pull a PDF up, because my understanding, you start with a PDF.
You start with a text file, yeah, of some sort, right?
So you can pull that up.
Right.
And just
Convert it to PDF.
convert it to PDF,
Print it
and
out.
then go from there to this, it has to get into the machine somehow.
Right, well, if you've looked at, yeah, I mean, it's just a file transfer.
Right.
So it's a computer to computer thing, and if you look at the open library books, how they're digitized, they're really great. I mean, they're clear as a bell, they're page by page. They don't use machine scanners, they have people turning the page, one page at a time to take pictures, so they're really high quality scans. You got a book, easy to do, so.
Thank you.
Could save on storage space. Then we'd have room for a machine.
Time's up, okay. All right, any further comments from the commission before we move on to approval of minutes? Okay. Approval of minutes. I do have a change.
Did you ask for a motion first?
All right. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? I thought we should amend them first, but. Is there a motion? Sure. Seconded by?
Second.
Okay, moved by Mary Ellen, seconded by Susan. And my change has to do with movements and seconds. On page 3, on line 125, it says the options for video recording, it was moved by Freeze and seconded by May, and I tend not to second items as the chair, so I don't know who seconded it. Does anybody remember seconding it, or? Okay, I guess we can leave it as it is, or else I can look at the video and see if I can find out who it was.
Rebecca can do that.
Okay, we can find that out, so I think that needs to be corrected. Any other changes or adjustments? Okay. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, say yes.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. All right.
Was that for both sets?
Is that for both sets? Yes. Correspondence and press coverage, there's lots of neat stuff here. We have a letter the art program, the art programs in the correspondence.
The art program?
The children's library activities, carving pumpkins and Legos.
The crafts programs?
The craft programs. Somebody sent a letter in appreciation of that. Have you seen it yet? Okay. And then there's press coverage, different reports from around the county. If people want to look at that, we can pass it around. Consent calendar, I believe there's nothing on the consent calendar. Action item by resolution. The action to adopt the policy on the post-employment benefits. Is there a motion to accept this policy?
Motion to adopt the
A
resolution.
motion to adopt the resolution?
Sure.
Oh, Mary Evelyn. And a second?
I'll second.
Helena, seconded. Is there commission discussion?
Yes. I I'm going to start sounding like Bob Bennett, and I apologize to everyone in advance. But I'm really not happy with the language that we've chosen for the last page on the back there, where we acknowledge that the library's fiscal limitations will keep it from moving away from pay-as-you-go for the short term. I don't know that we need to do that, and I don't know that that's a good policy. And then the plan to allocate funds to partially fund the liability when it's financially feasible. I feel like this is just way too mushy from what we had been discussing and what I think we were aiming for. So I would like to see language that says something like, to take paragraph 5 and paragraph 6 and merge them together to say basically that the commission commits to funding the liability to the maximum extent feasible each budget year. Now, maybe it won't be very much some budget years, but I think we should make a commitment to funding it as much as possible, rather than saying, yeah, we're gonna have to do pay-as-you-go for a while, and then we're gonna, try our best, but maybe we won't really do it. And I'm just really, so I would like to see a stronger statement about what it is this policy commits us to doing. Although I do understand we don't want to lock ourselves into something we just can't afford and can't do. But I think language talking about the funding it to the maximum extent feasible each year, and with a goal towards fully funding it and in a trust. I would like to see those elements.
I'll tell you what, because I struggled to come up with wording that worked here, I think what it sounds like is that you and I need to work on wording that you would
I
find.
would be happy to do that. I don't want to, if everybody else is happy with this, then, we can do it. But I'm just very concerned that this is watered down from the discussions that we had, and what we were maybe aiming to put in writing, and what I would be comfortable seeing in writing as a policy.
Yeah, I agree. I think having a clear statement of our intent, and we all have said we can't get there year one, but we do have an intent of where we're going. And just, if you want to, the one part, and Julia and I had a brief conversation on this, that I'm probably not comfortable is just arbitrarily throwing out a date if we haven't done some very careful analysis of what it would take to get us there, And I'm not opposed to putting a date in, but we'd have to do all the appropriate analysis to get us there, and I don't know, there are a lot of variables. But if we have a statement of intent, I'm good with that.
Other comments, Mary
That's fine.
Evelyn?
Yeah, it's fine.
I would be happy to meet with Sandy and
Or just send me some suggested wording.
language. Okay.
So in other words, we're not moving, we're not adopting this.
Postponing action.
We're postponing action on this item. Do we have any public comment on that postponement or the action, the resolution itself? All right. Discussion items. The management report. Where is the management report? There we go. Okay, updates on the management activities for discussion only. The management report, progress on focus and finish. Shall we start there?
By the way, that noise, they think, comes from interference from outside the building and not in the building.
Okay, so I can turn my phone back on. No. All right. Comments on focus and finish, questions?
I may have missed this because I didn't see it, but where are we on the hiring of our new financial officer?
It's posted. It's posted week before last, right after the last commission
When
meeting,
does it close?
May 31st.
That's so long.
6 weeks. Takes that long to get the word out and to get a good pool.
How is the pool filling?
I don't know.
Okay,
I don't see them.
somebody does.
It's a staff, it's just a tech,
Okay,
an account clerk or whatever. Patrick, you said there were 2 last week.
Currently, as of today, there are 4 applicants. It has been also posted on the Sonoma County's job site. And last Friday, they told me that they had 431 hits on it. So what we're guessing right now is that people are thinking about it, pulling together materials, and hopefully within the next couple of weeks, we'll see a larger response.
And it's also posted on the Association of Bay Area Government site.
It's a featured posting.
And is there like a, I haven't gone and looked, are there like a list of supplemental questions or something you?
No, we haven't done that.
So to someone who's interested in applying, they just send their resume, or do they have to
Yes,
fill
they
out a
have to
whole
fill out
questionnaire?
there's no questionnaire, there's an application form.
Okay, but it's not job specific?
No.
No.
I think that if we have to screen beyond what we get, we may do a supplemental questionnaire after we screen it at the first level.
Okay. But the process then for someone to apply is fill out the standard questionnaire, send the resume,
Right.
that's it? Okay.
And then if we did supplemental questionnaire afterwards, what is the time frame for getting those responses? How long do you give people?
Depends. You can give them a week or 2.
Well, I'm a little concerned that we're going to end the budget year without anybody in.
We were never going to end the budget year with anybody because Will wanted us, and this is what I'm still working on, is seeing if we can find somebody to manage the closeout of this fiscal year. Will strongly recommended against bringing the new person in until July or August, so we could not have, so they didn't have to step in the middle of a fiscal year. Which was why originally the hope was that Mark would stay through August. I have the name of somebody else who Karen Walker recommended might be a really excellent interim to get us through the closeout of the fiscal year. But it's really difficult for anybody to step in and do a closeout.
Okay.
The intent was never to have them on before the next fiscal year.
Other comments or questions?
I have a question about the training for the workplace security policy and the illness and injury prevention policy and program.
What number is that?
It is 1.7.1 on page 2.
Okay.
So I think, it's a concern of the commissions that this kind of training it's very important that staff is trained for these items. And so I would just like an update on, has anybody been trained? And if not, where are we
Patrick,
with
would
this?
you come
I
to the
see that
microphone,
there's
please?
draft procedures were reviewed the end of April, but this has kind of gone on for a little bit of time. So I just wanted to check in. Thanks, Patrick.
I believe on the summary report for last year, we made some mention of that. In the IIPP, there are various components. We addressed a couple of those recently, which was bodily fluids and also workers' compensation
With training.
procedures, trained.
Ergonomic procedures to prevent
Ergonomic
workers'
procedures for, we had consultants go out to all of the branches to do some basic safety and basic ergonomic training for all the branches. Once this new set of procedures gets approved for the workplace security, we'll be lining up training specific to that. And we've already had some initial conversations with, again, our safety consultants and also our employee assistance program and their ability to help provide some of that training to our staff.
So what's the anticipated date for workplace safety to start?
Well, the draft has had an initial review by the library management team. There are some edits happening right now, so we hope to get that finalized probably within the next 2 weeks, I think. But it's still going to have to be reviewed by the the union since it's safety related. And unfortunately, I can't tell you how long that's going to be because we have a number of items on the docket that the union has chosen not to. They've determined that they want to finish the negotiations process before addressing some of these other issues. So we're at a little bit of a standstill in terms of some of those things.
Thanks.
Other questions? I have some. 1.2.1, it says by June 30th, 2013, which is next month. So you've got sample RFPs, but,
Writing the RFP now.
okay, so we're kind of on track for that.
It may be a little after June 30th, but it's being drafted.
And we're moving along on the performance management process, but we still have some people that are behind. Are they feeling pressure?
Well, could we have an answer and not just a nod of heads, please?
The answer is yes.
Okay. I mean, I'm pleased with the progress, but there's still things that need to happen.
Right, wasn't the deadline for that the end of February, or was it the end of March?
Somewhere in one of those two. All right, my next comment was, I came upon this when I got to 1.5.1. July is going to be very busy. A lot of things are supposed to start in July, just so I'm noticing that. Let's see.
You're supposed to start, they're not supposed to finish, though.
I understand, but it's still going to be a busy month.
Every month is a busy month.
I know. And, what was the, and have we made, on 1.6.1, adopt a new and revised policies based on established priorities? We've been talking about the issue of possibly getting some interns in that area.
We've advertised for them. We have no body yet who's volunteered.
Okay. And then the next thing I had was, I was just interested if somebody could tell me what the deal breaker, an idea of what, for Evergreen. I'm on 2.1.3.
Could we provide a report at another time on that? Because we're still looking at a number of issues. That's highly complex. So I think you probably want to wait.
I'm fine to wait, but it's just this idea of deal breakers,
There's certain functionality that if we cannot get it, or it's too expensive to get, then it's a deal breaker.
Okay.
Then we don't proceed to recommend Evergreen.
Okay, now 2.2.1, I just am interested in what's a card sort exercise?
Wow, someone's interested in card sort, great. This is where
I'm
you
just
take,
interested what it is.
so our website has many, many, many pages.
Right.
Hundreds of pages, actually
Right.
thousands of pages. And the idea is to take the top pages that are viewed, and we have statistics that show which pages get used the most. And we took the top 300 or so of those and made a card for each of them. And then the committee looked at each card and put them into piles that made logical sense to each of us sorting the cards. And then we looked at the piles and from there tried to figure out the categories. This is a website design exercise that's apparently industry standard. It's kind of amazing that people actually use cards to
Design a website.
design websites, but you got to have something tangible, because if you're just in cyberspace, nothing makes any sense. So then the piles were taken by a subgroup, and they're taken off, and we try to give them logical names. And from there we can spec the whole site, and then we can put out an RFP to hire a designer to design the site, and so on. So it's a necessary first step, but it was really fun, actually.
Sounds like it.
Kindergarten thing.
And
yeah.
watching PBS? Yeah. And then on 3.2.1, The annual report for the library was begun on the 15th of April. How are we moving on that? Where are we going?
That was superseded by the requirement that I had to finish and redo a bunch of documents for the county's budget process.
Okay, so when,
I don't know, Tim.
okay, but it's, is it only up to you to do that? Last year, didn't you and Julia work on it together, or,
We had a whole committee that did it.
Yeah,
right?
Susan and I think, developed pretty much the PowerPoint based on basic statistics and information that Sandy provided to us.
Okay, so is it something that the commission should be carrying the?
No,
Oh, no, okay,
I mean, it ends up being staff work. I mean, David helped me with it, David, and we had an outside intern who did a lot of the work on it.
well,
But and I've had no indication from the Board of Supervisors that they want to report at this point.
but I think it's important that we be proactive in some way in making a report.
You know, it can be very straightforward, and typically in the ones I've seen in the files from pre-2002, 2003 in there, were very straightforward, just sort of text reports. So the question is, do you want something that's fancier, or do you just want a basic report?
Can we just update some of the PowerPoint stuff that we had with current information?
We could do that.
I think that would, and then, I would like to see that on our library webpage.
It's our-
Right.
It's there.
They update it though, so
Oh,
that we
they
have an
update.
annual state of the library, even if it's just the same structure each time, and then we update it annually.
Actually, what I was hoping to do, and hoping to possibly get some assistance, some professional assistance, is most libraries do a popular version of their annual report that's something that's then used and distributed. So that would require some outside assistance.
Well, and I think it's important. I think that in terms of the discussion we've been having about the issues that have come up at the JPA committee, and in terms of the fact of the input we've been getting from some labs and some of the public, I think it's important that we acknowledge as a commission and as a commission that we're not ignoring that there are issues that we are trying to figure out how to, that it's not only how many people use the library, but the library is facing some significant issues. And that we, in part of our annual report, mentioned that we're cognizant of these issues. We are trying to figure out solutions, but that it's not that we're ignoring them. I think when we remain silent, it seems as if we are ignoring. And if you really look at our meetings, you see that we aren't. But I think we need to, in an annual report, that we need to say, here are the challenges that we're facing.
Okay, that's different from a typical library annual report.
Okay?
That is more a public
Statistics.
relations piece talking about all the great things the library did this last year. So what you're envisioning is something different than what I was envisioning.
Okay, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I don't know, am I alone here from the commission?
I think what we were trying to do last year, and which we should try to do every year, is kind of a state of the library, which you got, the financials in a simplified version have to be, in my mind, the nuts and bolts and the crux of it, where, and some of that is just the bottom line financials, and some are, the nice little charts about usage, and we talked about, some of the revenue challenges, if you show the chart showing the taxes down and,
And I think that we
usage up.
haven't-
But I think what you're getting to is also having some narrative in terms of key priorities, in the state of the library. On one hand, you have, we introduced ebooks, isn't that great? And that could be on a great things we did. And on the other side is, due to revenue constraints, we continue to be closed on Mondays, which we know is, disappointing for many of our constituents. And so I do think you want to have a document that you provide to the public, certainly with the numbers, but also I think with kind of some key narrative points. I think you want to do that every year as our communication out to the public. And then, put it on the website, give it to interested stakeholders, whoever. And I mean, if you recall, when we first started that State of the Library, I believe it was Denver? There was a library in Colorado.
Right, it was Jefferson County, which is,
That we were trying to emulate I haven't gone to look, but I imagine they probably do an annual update,
So how do we proceed? Other people want to put in on it? I mean, do we form a subcommittee that works on this?
If we have to do that, if that's what we need to do to get it
Okay.
started.
Can we have that on the future agenda to discuss the subcommittee and what it would do and give it a direction? Go ahead. No?
Well, because it doesn't sound like Sandy has time to do it, so.
Well, I think it's the question of, my interpretation now, and I may get some distance on it and feel differently or think differently, but that there's a combination of what an annual report is. And I'm feeling one part of it is that an acknowledgement that we are trying to tackle issues. And there has been, I think there's been quite a bit of success also. I mean, the library is serving people, the staff is serving people quite well. The children's programs happen, the e-books happen, the wine library happens. There's a lot of excellent things that are continuing to happen, but there also are issues. I mean, this has been a year where we've had the grand jury report, we have the JPA committee, we have a lot of things to acknowledge that we're not ignoring, basically. That's all I'm saying. So let's talk about this at the next meeting or the meeting after that and come up with a committee that presents an annual report or creates one.
We could start with modifying
The
current
current
one.
one.
the
Yeah,
current one,
with
and then
updated stuff.
add the narrative as it goes on.
One
I
of-
think the sooner we can get something done, the better it'll be.
yeah, I think I think there was criticism of the last one, that it was too negative. When we tried to get the foundation and the newsletter to focus on it, they were reluctant to do that
Well, I
because,
think that was a little bit of a different issue, though. I think that we were giving it to the foundation to be used in certain ways for a newsletter that the foundation was taking over, and I think there was a very large discussion at the foundation about what the purpose of the newsletter is and what the focus of the newsletter was going to be, and they decided to go in a different direction than.
well, but even before that, there was a real resistance to
Right.
helping publish it and get it out there.
Well, I'm sure the foundation would put it on its website, or at least link to the website. I mean, but in terms of printing and publishing, I mean, the foundation's kind of headed off in another direction with what they're doing with the newsletter.
Right. But I did get the feedback from Andy and Susan and from members of the foundation that they really didn't.
It's not a fundraising tool, which is, I
Yeah.
I'm
think,
not
what.
sure we need to have it in a paper format, but I think we need to have it on the website.
See, I think that there are different expectations about how we use it, so
Right.
this is I think it will be good to have a further discussion.
Right.
It sounds like you want it to be the commission's report
Yeah.
to the public about, and not a library annual report, which are a little bit different.
And it probably,
Maybe there's a letter from the commission that's attached to it, as opposed to rewriting the whole
And
Right.
report.
I would like to see it presented to all the labs.
right,
If
that's,
not in written form, then in the PowerPoint. And
Yeah.
I think each commissioner should be presenting an annual report to their lab about what we've been doing.
Could the statistical part of this, Sandy, be updated pretty quickly?
Well, we're into the situation now where we'd probably be better off waiting till the end of June to use the statistics for the year that we're finishing rather than last year, That would be one question.
So if we were to discuss this at our next meeting, and if we were to have, at that point, copies of the most recent plan, and then we can look at it and comment on it and go from there, and then we'll have the new statistics before the July meeting, and we can, or before the August meeting, for sure. Yeah, July 30th, yeah, it's not quite a lot of, yeah. I saw a lot of
Panicked looks in the
grabbing
audience.
their seats in the. Okay. And I do have one more question. Don't give me these things, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I just have one
Go
thing
ahead.
I want to go backwards on. I think we need to, every year, have an annual report.
Well, yeah, we should.
Right. Okay, by June 20, this is 4.1.2. And today we're going to talk a bit about the strategic planning
That should say June 30th.
by June 30th, 2014.
2014.
And our start date is this October.
Right.
Let's see. I'm assuming, how can I ask this? This is a reasonable timeline? There's no way to make it faster?
No,
Okay,
not with everything else going on. And if you looked at the process
right.
in there, I think you'll see, by the time we get somebody on board, and this is something that will take commission time as well as a lot of staff time.
Okay, that's all I had. Are there any
I
other?
do have one more
Okay.
question on 3.3.2. Could you, maybe it's planned for a later agenda, but maybe you could just give us a quick, what is?
I would be thrilled to tell you about this. I actually did write up some information for here, and I did not get it to Sandy in time in order to have it included in this month's report. The Discover and Go program is a partnership that we are going to be entering with Contra Costa Library System. They developed a program where they created this program and had it grant funded to develop the software to allow them to offer online downloadable museum passes to their patrons. So then they entered into partnerships with lots of different museums, venues in Contra Costa County. And then their patrons, each museum said, okay, I'll give you 20 museum passes to all of your patrons for this month. And so then their patrons will sign up, and then they can just download and print the free passes to the Bay Area Discovery Museum, to the Asian Art Museum, to the wherever. Contra Costa has written a grant to allow 10 additional library systems to enter into this program with them. We will then, so the grant will cover the setup of the entire program, and then we will be paying a prorated amount that covers just the maintenance agreements and the fees, which will be $400 a year. So Sonoma County Library, we are on track. We have 9 local venues identified that we're going to be approaching to have them participate in this, to come into this with us. And the date here that says start date July 1, we're actually hoping to launch July 1. So we're in the planning process now, and it's kind of an exciting new thing that we're gonna be able to offer to the patrons of Sonoma County. So more information later.
Is Sonoma Valley Museum of Art in there?
It's on my list.
Okay. If you need a contact,
The guy asked me, when will I start approaching the different venues to talk about the partnerships? And I'm like, as soon as summer reading has started and I hand that over to the children's librarians, then I'm going to focus on that. So, a couple weeks.
Okay, now I've managed to lose my agenda here, all right. Status report, performance
No,
management.
there's something else before that.
Monthly activities, and this is the letter and the monthly activities.
It's it's various things. Do you not have it?
11.1.2.
Yes, I do have it. All right. Any questions or comments on that one from the commission? There we go. None? Any other? I did have one. Why it's a fairly significant price in change in the HVAC at Healdsburg. What's involved in that? Why has it gone up so much?
It's been out of our hands, and we don't know why it's gone up that much.
Well, okay.
Jamie, why don't you stand up and give a little report on what's going on with that?
I do not have a good answer to that question.
You want to talk a little bit about what's happened in the last few weeks?
Sure. So I guess going back further a few months, we hadn't really heard very much from the city on this item. And then a few weeks ago, they contacted us and said they were ready to move forward with putting the bid out. However, they felt like the estimate had gone up. I think they had a third party come in and evaluate the current HVAC and look at it, and they provided an estimate and helped them to write the bid that's going out. And that particular company provided this revised figure. So they shared that with us a few weeks ago, and they said, let us know if you want to discuss this further. And we said, yeah, we do. So we had a short meeting with them, and they explained that both sides really agreed that we just want to proceed. And this is just an estimate. It might not, come in that high when the work is actually done, but we wanted to go ahead and get the bids put out. So they're working on that right now. I think it's going to be posted next week. And then there's a walkthrough scheduled for May 20th for potential bidders to come and look at the library and look at the space. And I believe the tentative start date for the work itself is the end of June.
Remind me, we approved half, is that right?
Yes.
Not to exceed what?
57?
I think I put that figure in the report, 56
Yeah, it's 56,
something.
650, yeah.
Yeah, it was an up to 56, I believe.
That's right.
So if it does end up being anything more than that, we would obviously need to come back and regroup on it. But my feeling and Kathy LaRock's feeling was that we just need this done. And it's going to cost what it's going to cost.
Is there a pretty extensive list of companies that are going to bid, or is it a short list that's defined of who they're going to work with? In other words, is it wide open to anyone
I
who wants
believe
to
it'll be a
bid?
public notice. I'm sure
Yeah.
they probably already have a few companies in mind to share it with, but I don't know how, extensive their list is.
I noticed on something else they've done that they actually use a website called BidSource or Bid. They are very aggressive in getting their requests for proposals out there for bids like this. So I feel certain that it'll be distributed widely.
Which could help get, competitive bids in versus if they're working off a vetted short list.
I just want to say I actually appreciate the bad news earlier rather than later, as opposed to, so now we have a chance to think about it, and when we get asked for additional money, we won't be going, what? So I like the process where we're told there's an issue, and then we get to revisit a solution later.
And just to be clear, this is coming from fund balance.
It would have to.
Yeah, okay, I just want to be clear where the money, when we are looking at spending money, where it's coming from. Any other comments about the management report? This is the one with the, okay, yes, I do have.
You have the corrected attachment B here.
You got it. What's the change?
It's not a change, it's that there were two attachment A's accidentally
Okay.
in the original one.
This is where we get the information about how the calculations were made in regards to the proposals for doing another day.
How much it would, just samples of how much it would cost to open other branches for Monday.
Okay, and are there any questions from the commission about these figures?
Dina didn't use the actual salaries and benefits, so I've done a little bit of, and she doesn't have utilities or indirect costs in there, so that there are several differences in the way the costs were
Right.
calculated.
Yeah, there's no allocated costs in here. And there's,
And the actual percentage of benefits at Petaluma runs, for several reasons, runs closer to 35% than 25%. Because just the health insurance coverages and things like that they cover more of the staff, have more of their families covered and that kind of thing.
Could you tell us why you picked these branches?
I think south, I can't remember because it was just 3 spots to have 3 different libraries open in 3 different locations in the county was the main reason. It was just for example.
Could you, I'm not sure I understand, I don't understand, what annual cost per day figure, what does that
Well,
mean?
that simply takes the total cost to run that library for a year and divides it by 5. So that's how much it costs to run that library for a day.
219,000?
Right.
A year.
For the whole
A year
year.
or a day?
For a year.
For like every Tuesday.
52
It's the
weeks.
Tuesday.
Okay, got it, thank you.
I'm interested,
Monday.
this is a question that I'm sure, I hate to ask these questions, but I do it anyway. How many hours a year is the library open?
I don't have that right in front of me. We report it, but it would be, actually now, it's easier because it's 40 times 52 for each branch.
Yeah, but then there's holidays.
Yeah, and I don't, we'd have to look that up.
I would
We
just
actually-
be interested in knowing that number because it's a divisor for some other questions I have further down the line. But I'd be interested in knowing how many hours the library is actually open a year. And I'm sure you can explain this, but it's a question I had about the indirect costs. The issue is that the indirect costs are the system staff and salaries and benefits and services and supplies.
Right.
The indirect costs are the same. The system staff and salaries haven't changed whether we have 52 hours or 40, right?
That's right.
So, because those employees work Monday through Friday as opposed to the library staff, which works Tuesday to Saturday.
Well, they all work 40 hours or a portion thereof.
Right. Okay. So the costs, let's see if I can explain this. The cost here says the cost for 40 hours is, let's say, just looking at Healdsburg, is $350,000, or really $351,000 basically.
The allocated cost from the system level support is $350,950 based on 5.9% of the total cost of running the library.
so maybe what we really need though is a breakout of variable versus fixed. Because I think maybe what you're trying to get at is there's certain fixed costs that don't change regardless of if we're open 2 hours or 2,000 hours.
Exactly.
You know, your salary is going to be your salary
Right.
regardless.
Right.
On the other hand, there probably are other allocated costs that are in fact volume driven or hours, you know, in terms of, I don't know.
Supplies,
Supplies.
office supplies,
how much-
toilet paper.
You know, supplies, obviously, energy, utilities, but even wear and tear on books, you know, the more hours we're open, the more whatever.
Right.
So, I mean, I think that's, in a way, the distinction is there's certain costs that are fixed costs that don't change with the hours
As we're
used and
open.
other costs do.
Exactly, and our accounting system right now doesn't give us easy access to breaking that out. This is fairly crude.
Well,
But we have listed the items, the electric, water, and sewer that would be identifiable as being directly related to that branch.
right.
Which was the best we could do with our current financial management system.
And there's probably certain supplies that are, you could say, well, we use this much.
Actually, I
Whatever.
did just generally on a macro level look, and our janitorial supplies in particular were down about, I forget the percentage right off the top of my head, but you could see that those had gone down in the first year that we were closed on Monday, just as utilities had gone down just about the same percentage as the cut in hours, about 24, 25%.
But essentially, if I'm understanding this correctly, in terms of indirect costs, system staff salaries and benefits are a fixed, that's the same whether we're open 52 or 40 hours.
That's correct.
So that this calculation is a bit misleading from my understanding of it, because you're saying that it costs $1,096,000 to be open, but if that, that's direct, that's what it costs for that hours, but it wouldn't, those, at least the 350, I'm just staying with Healdsburg, but that 351 wouldn't change if we were open 52 or 45 hours.
Except you have to have more staff.
It might change.
It might change? Okay.
Technically, I mean, you have to, yes, this is somewhat crude, but there's certain fixed costs that have to be paid and have to be acknowledged.
Yeah.
And they're going to be there whether we're open 5 hours or 60 hours. And you still have to make sure they're paid for. If we were to open one of these libraries on a Monday, we have costs that we're going to see that we don't see now. And demands on staff time for IT support, for HR support, for payroll, for any number of things that are going to be there and be greater than they are right now. Substitute costs, extra help costs.
Yeah, and I would view those as variable because they're driven by volumes.
Right. And this doesn't even look at additional staff.
No, but I mean, to open on Monday, you either have to get substitutes or new positions to cover it.
No, I'm not, my question isn't really about opening on Monday.
This question has more to do with the indirect costs.
My question has to do with the total price. If we were to run a comparable list, now, one of my pet things is we are in binary thinking here. We're 50 hours or 42, but staying there, 40 or 52, staying in that mode, if we were to open back up to 50 hours, the top part of that would change, and the indirect costs, as Sandy's just said, might be somewhat different, but they wouldn't raise at the same rate as the other costs would to be. So we still, from my perspective, and I don't know whether I'm speaking only for me or not, but from my perspective, we still don't have an accurate picture of what it would cost actually to open the libraries effectively for 52 hours,
Well,
50 hours,
And that,
52.
this is the best you're going to get with our current information that we have available. And I think, if you remember, one of the questions raised in the report was, do we really understand how much it costs to open the library for a day, or what it's costing us to run? And I don't think we really do know what it costs to run the library, because we don't have the kind of financial information that we need to really get down to the granular level of, how much time is really spent making sure we have full staff at a library when we're open and things like that, just because we don't have a real true indirect cost study done, and we don't have the cost analysis capability to really look at it. So this is the best you're going to get at this point. And I think you have to acknowledge that it costs money to be open, and to not acknowledge that their indirect costs would be a mistake on the part of the commission.
I agree, but go ahead, Julie.
Well, I was
If
gonna
I'm
say,
ignoring these people over here, please yell.
we may not know exactly how much it will cost to open, but in my mind, it's an interesting conversation, and certainly for priorities in the future, it's perhaps worth discussing, although I'm not sure at the length we've been discussing it, because clearly we don't have enough money to even fully staff what we need to do for the current hours that we have. I mean, the thought that we would open any more hours, to me, is, until there's more money, out of the question. I can't see, maybe other commissioners feel differently and would vote differently, but I would not be in support of trying to extend our hours until we fully cover the staffing for the hours that we have right now, which we can't afford to do. So, I guess at some point, the fact that we don't know the exact number isn't as troubling to me as it is to some.
Okay. Any other comments from the commissioners on this?
I agree with Julia. We've spent a lot of time talking about something that's pie in the sky for now.
I will tell you that it was really an interesting process to work with Don Schwartz on the county budget document, because he was pretty stunned at our financial position. And I think for the first time, the narrative that he wrote and the narrative that was going up the food chain acknowledges just how difficult our financial position is, particularly when you throw in the OPEB on top of the structural deficit that we have.
What Don Schwartz said to me in a meeting was that he couldn't fathom that we would open more hours, and in fact, he was rather surprised we were open as many as we were, given
Given our
budget,
financial position.
Given our financial position and OPEB.
Is his library card current?
Yes, it is.
So I disagree in part, and I think this is an important discussion for the commission to have, because if you don't have this discussion, you don't know what your goal is, and when you do get more money, you don't know if you can do it if you don't know how much it costs. So I think it's important for us to try to spend some time to really figure it out, because when, I think a number of us have expressed this as to be a priority when we do get more money, and I think it's important to know what we're looking at, so we can make that decision thoughtfully at that point. So.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I do think that it's time consuming, but the analysis is worth it because we should understand. And I also think it's important to and I agree with you, Sandy, as much as anyone here, that we have not the perfect financial information that we would love to have, and that hopefully we will have someday. But I think you can still go through the conceptual exercise and say, what kinds of things should be considered and what should not? And again, janitorial supplies in, Sandy's salary out. I mean, I'm just throwing that out there as things that aren't, that would or wouldn't vary depending on if we're open 40 hours or 50 hours. On the other hand, there are other things that may be hard to say in terms of wear and tear on the books and,
The facilities and the
facilities, do you just ramp it up with
computers.
5% or 10%? But I think that going through that exercise and determining what is or isn't impacted by being open longer is a worthy exercise.
And actually, I think that the reality is, and this is that your staff and their available time is impacted. So you have to look at how many staff you really need on board to manage being open that many hours. And I don't think we ever have looked at that.
Well, I think the commission is very interested in that. So I think, isn't that part of one of the processes that you're going to be doing? One of the projects on your list?
Is that part of the classification?
Yeah, is it part of the
No,
classification?
that's not part of the classification study.
Because I think we've asked that question, you know, how many staff do you need at each branch? And are there
Well, we have-
differences
we have
based
given
on
you
how
that.
the setup is, you know, just self-check? Not, you know, and absolutely, I don't want people to get the wrong idea. The commission does not support self-check to cut staff, but does it ease up some of the duties so that you have staff who can do other things there if there is self-check there? That's the kind of thing I think that we're
Well,
very interested in
You
hearing.
do have the cost to, you have two separate costs plus a percentage, suggested rough percentage of how much the administrative cost would have to be, go up if we were to open, if we had adequate staff or if we were to open again. And we gave you those a couple of months ago.
And this is one of the things that came up in the Soka Soul presentation.
Wait, I'm sorry, we've got
Oh.
a conversation.
No, it's okay.
Was the issue that the commission had not been looking at the lack of staff. And I think this is one of those times where I was on the commission when the report came out from, what's her name, Goodrich?
Jeannie Goodrich?
Judy Goodrich report, and we did, on the commission, look at that, and we did, at that point, increase the staff. I don't know that we increased it as much as we should have, but it's another example of where the commission has been accused of not confronting an issue, and we've been aware of this issue for a long time and also been trying to.
Do you remember when that was? I'd love to go back and look at that.
It's in the paper from the, it's in the report is.
That we increased staff?
Yeah, it was like my first commission meeting, so it
It was
was.
2006.
Okay.
It was actually.
Because are those minutes and stuff, those are probably on the web.
I'm
That
not
was
sure
my
the
first
document
commission
is,
meeting, as a matter of fact.
At that time, the issue had more to do with staff safety and making sure that we had two people in the building at all times. And so that was what we did at that time, was add enough staff. It didn't go in depth beyond that.
Well, we also added staff for processing for DVDs, I believe, at that time, too.
Oh, well, yes, Mr. Bennett, yeah.
Right, but that's, I think that's helpful. I think that's
Yeah.
helpful to look at that.
Right. Anyway, not wanting to beat a dead horse, let's move on to the rest. Let's see, where are we here?
Now you're on
Staff reports. The monthly, the performance management implementation. We've sort of referred to that already, document 11.1.3. Any comments or questions from folks? Nothing from the commission? Okay. Moving on to the financial report.
See it done.
Patrick, relay the message that the pressure stays on, just because we did not have a comment. We would like to see it done.
Well, once you get it done, it has to be done again and again, so
Right.
it's.
Right.
it's-
We want that. We want annual reviews.
And quarterly and midterm reviews and.
Yes, it's important.
And reviews of reviews. All right. Financial report, questions? Comments? I had a question. Asked for you guys and then nothing happened. Okay, we're talking about the data lines 6041, which you have
Right, that's the one that we have known for
6140.
several months it's
Right.
ahead. We just haven't transferred money in to cover it. It was a one-time expenditure.
And we're 112% on 6521, which is county services.
It includes primarily the accounting services.
And just for my information, since I didn't,
I don't, that number doesn't look accurate.
okay,
I'll have to go back and check it.
They haven't raised their rates again.
No, and I don't know why, they don't usually do a transfer until the end of the year either, so I don't know what's going on with that. I'll check that.
and also, let's see, okay, that's all I basically wanted to ask about. Any other questions from the commissioners?
Well, since we're going on percentages here, 6517, the branch networking.
That's the one we talked about, yeah. It's-
Oh, that's the 136%. Gotcha, okay, that was it.
All right, no other comments from the commission, questions about all those wonderful numbers? All right, let's move on to staff reports. The staff report in the strategic planning process.
You asked for this.
Yes, thank you. It made it much more clear.
I'll be happy to answer any question.
Are there any?
I think my question is, why wouldn't we hire somebody to help with this process from the beginning instead
We
of
are.
wait? Oh, it seemed to indicate that it wasn't going to be until at some point farther in, possible consultant role.
Well,
So
the assumption is that we're hiring them from the get-go.
Okay,
It was just potentially, these are the kinds of things that the consultant would do.
okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry if that's not clear. It will depend on what they propose. I mean, and whoever,
And how are you going to go about that? I mean,
we'll do a request for a proposal and recruit.
is there a list? Does the county have lists of people that we could
Actually,
send
we would
it to?
probably use some of the sites and send them out to people who typically do library planning or who have library planning
Okay.
experience.
Sounds like a good plan.
And this isn't the document that should probably cover it, but there will be a role for the public and labs and other
That's
stakeholders.
for, it's in there, assess the environment on the second page,
Okay,
phase 3. Data gathered from internal and external sources of analysis, identification of trends, as well as the needs in the community, interpretation of data and emerging themes. I mean, the whole thing is that you're looking for an extensive data gathering that includes gathering public opinion, both qualitative and quantitative.
okay. Anything else? Questions? And what's the timeline
I think I said that, I think the Focus and Finish says that we'll try to have the consultant selected by October.
So when does the request for consultant, kind of the estimated time for that?
It's back here, I'd have to look. It's,
Is that in Focus and Finish?
it's in Focus and Finish.
Hire firm.
The start date was supposed to be the 1st of May to start writing it, but I'm writing the one for the classification and pay study, but the idea is to get it done in the next couple of 3 months.
Okay,
That one will actually be easier for me to write than the classification and pay class and comp RFP, because I know more about strategic planning for libraries since I used to be a consultant who did that.
okay. So, from your experience, you put that out and it takes, what, a month or a couple
4 to
months?
6 weeks.
To get the
6 weeks.
responses back?
Yeah.
and Go through selection criteria, rank them, or what else?
Probably do interviews, maybe Skype interviews.
So then, did you say October you thought we'd have?
I think that's what's on
I think it said September.
Well, September says getting ready.
here.
I wasn't sure what that meant.
No, but I'm focusing finish.
The start date for the actual information gathering phase is October 1st, so the goal is to have the consultant on board to start working with us by the 1st of October.
By September, complete the procurement process and make recommendations to the commission.
Right, so that the target is to start. 4.1.2, the target is to start the actual planning around the 1st of October, or the information gathering.
Okay. Any other comments or questions about strategic plan? I'm really pleased that we're doing this and moving in this direction. I think it's important on a whole bunch of levels, and I'm glad we're doing it. Okay, materials budget buying power.
This was postponed from the last. So
I
Mr.
prepared
Dodd prepared this.
very short summary of what the landscape looks like, and I can take questions. I know that there are probably unanswered questions that I have, just looking at what I've gathered, so you may have some as well.
This was better than I thought it would be.
Oh, in terms of the outlook?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, because of the economy, I think that vendors realize that people can't pay more for most things. I think we see that when we shop, except for some things that are more volatile. Prices, the CPI has been pretty flat for quite some time, I think. So this sort of fits that same model. What's not included in here is any kind of information about periodicals. And I have some understanding that periodical subscription prices are going up slightly. We did cut our entire periodicals expenditure budget quite a bit a couple of years ago, I guess. And so, help me out here, that was like 3 years ago, or? So it's a smaller percentage of the overall materials budget now, but it's one of those things that tends to grow. And the same is true of our electronic databases. The interesting thing about electronic databases is that it's sort of like buying a used car. If you really get a chance to talk to the vendor and say, we just can't afford that much, they will often back down and say, well, what did you want to spend today? And you'll say, I didn't want to spend anything today. And then they'll say, well, so anyway, but we're in the middle of trying to figure out how to do that now that we no longer have the negotiator we used to have with the North Bay Cooperative Library System, Joe Cochran, who did a fabulous negotiating job with our databases. We have to get to those vendors now, and we have people in between us and the vendors, and we're trying to sort of move them out of the way so we can talk to them ourselves. Hope that makes sense.
It's too bad we don't have access. This it was so nice in North Carolina because we used the 2 top negotiators for the 2 largest research
Can we have them?
universities, who did it on behalf of all the libraries in North Carolina. Got us fabulous rates.
I suppose the University of California would want to negotiate with all the libraries in California.
Well, there
It's
is
not
a
that-
group called Khalifa that is supposed to be doing that on behalf of California Public Libraries. And we're pursuing sort of 2, I am going into too much detail, but we're pursuing 2 avenues. One is to talk to Khalifa about what kind of bids they could get us for our databases, and then also to talk to, tomorrow morning we have a call with one of the vendors to talk about what kind of pricing and models they might have going forward. So depending on which of those works out more to our advantage, that's the direction we will go.
I had fun. It's been a while since I've done this kind of thing, but I even looked up on Google about how to deal with percentage increase.
Huh?
I figured it out. But I did do a total from 2010 to 2012, and there has been a 1.28% average increase in the cost of materials based on just this data.
Right.
And I think the only thing that I want to say is our material budget has not grown since 2008. And so it has shrunk, and even though it's only a 1.28% increase, we are able to do less. And as it goes on, 1% a year or 2 years does grow. So it's not a significant increase, but I just want to say that we're still stuck with the same materials budget.
Well, it's compound interest going in reverse.
Can't we just give up like hard covers? Just go with the cheaper.
Just wait a year and a half until everything comes out in trade paper. Yeah, and I'll send them all to you. The patrons, that is, yeah.
Well, and the thing that's really irrational is pricing for ebooks, which we didn't even grow.
Right.
Yeah, I
Broach
tried to
here.
sort of capture that a little bit.
Yeah.
It's radically crazed, and I'm reluctant to say anything about it.
Yeah, we
really.
decided that that was a can of worms that you'd rather revisit some other time.
Yeah, so,
But the difference in what an individual pays and what a library pays for an ebook is incredibly
All right, any further comments from the commission?
Thank you. It's very
Thanks
helpful.
a lot.
Very much.
my pleasure, thanks.
All right, now's the time for public comment on the last area of the agenda. Is there any public comment? There being none, we move on to number 12, Library Advisory Board appointments.
So there's two different libraries, so two different resolutions or one?
It's two different resolutions.
I move by resolution that the Sonoma County Library Commission appoint Neil Herring to the new position on the Sebastopol Library Advisory Board for a term ending on June 30th, 2016.
Okay, that's moved by Helena, seconded by?
Second.
Seconded by Julia. Is there any commission discussion? Probably usually not. Any public comment? Not. All right, all those in favor saying yes?
Aye.
All those opposed? No, say no. All right.
Wait,
Yes,
I've got
next one. I'm just, this is my cheat sheet. It's not folding things up here. Okay, do you have
all
a
right,
motion?
yes, I do. I move by resolution that the Sonoma County Library Commission appoint Lorna Sheridan to the unexpired position on the Sonoma Valley Library Advisory Board for a term ending on June 30, 2015.
I second.
Okay, so it's moved by Mary Evelyn and seconded by Helena. Commission discussion? Public comment? All right, all those in favor say yes.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, we are now, what? Motion carried. All right, all those, we are now moving into closed session pursuant to Government Code 54957 to discuss public employee evaluation.